Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second annual Hollywood Game Changers, a conversation with the women behind popular film and TV projects. My name is Joy Donnell, and I am co-founder of the Center for Intersectional Media Entertainment, or CME for short. We work with artists, academics, activists, allies in the industry, and audiences so that we can take a combination of research, community building, and really debunking and decoding tropes that are steeped in inequity and dehumanization so that we can work together to actually tell stories that matter. And with that in mind, I'm so honored to be here today and talking to this amazing panel of talented women who are making strides in the entertainment industry. So join me in welcoming all of them to the virtual stage. First up, she is the costume designer on Netflix Halston. Please welcome Jeriana San Juan. Next, she directed episodes 5 and 6 on Netflix Shadow and Bone. Please welcome Mairzee Almas. Next, she is an orchestrator and music director who worked on the internet phenomenon Ratatouille, the TikTok musical, and is the founder of the Broadway Sinfonietta Orchestra. Please welcome Macy Schmidt. Next, she is a music supervisor on the Paramount Plus series, Why Women Kill, and the film Deadly Illusions. Please welcome Jennifer Smith.
Hi.
And last, but certainly not least, she is a production designer on Comedy Central's Drunk History. Please welcome Monica Sotto. Welcome, welcome, welcome to this panel. Oh my goodness. You know, this is all about women in Hollywood and how basically shaking up things and changing the status quo, right? So I just want to go ahead and start off with the thing that, of course, always comes up when we've got such an illustrious array of women in one space talking about Hollywood. What does it mean to you to be a woman in the industry?
Well, that's a loaded question. I mean, I can speak to my own experience. Being a woman in this industry, in my industry in particular, costume design is not that rare. What I find in my experience is that there's not a big representation of Black, Latina, Asian. You know, there's truly, that part of it has always been scary. I think that's always been scary to me because there was never anybody who I really could identify with coming up in this business. You know, lots of women for sure. I think in costume design in particular, there's a camaraderie with female costume designers in a very unique way. But I think more often than not, we connect as people, as creative people, you know, across the board. And that's something I've always felt like, you know, my voice, it's easy to be not heard as a costume designer because I have my own experience with the script and I share that with the director primarily. But when you're at the table, it's nice to make yourself heard, you know, because you're there for a reason. And, you know, as a woman, I think sometimes maybe we're trained not to do that. But it's a collaboration. That's how this industry is how it works. So it was hard for me to gain my own little, you know, my own cojones to start talking.
I think that in my particular field, women are far, far less represented. I mean, I remember growing up going to Broadway shows and I would always open the playbill and like look back at like all of those lists of names and kind of see who was credited in those things. And, you know, it is, I guess, not surprising then, however many years later, I do not really have female mentors in my field. I get asked in a lot of panels, like, talk about your female mentors. And it's always like a very depressing answer to be like, that's not really what my experience was. You know, in the last 10 years on Broadway, there has only been one woman lead orchestrator on any show at any point. There has not been a woman of color doing that work. And yeah, so I think a lot about how, like, on the one hand, like, we are, like, it's never been a more equitable moment in the history of show business to be a woman in this industry. And at the same time, I think a lot about how I hope that the next generation of women who's doing the kind of work that we're doing doesn't have the same answers that we have on these sorts of panels. And thinking about, like, you know, being a woman in the industry, to me, a big part of that is thinking about what we're doing is changing it for the next generation of women. And some of that is accomplished just through like women in this moment achieving new heights of success. But some of it is also about thinking about, when women 50 years from now are asked these exact same questions, like what are their answers going to be like? And I hope that it, continues to grow and evolve, and I'm confident that it will.
That is amazing. I think that what Macy said is exactly the perspective, that hopefully we won't need panels like this because it'll be irrelevant. It'll be like, so what is it like to be a brunette in the industry? Like it shouldn't, it becomes like, what is it like to have green eyes and be in the, it should be a non-something, I think, personally.
What it means to be a woman in the industry, it's awesome because you do feel like this frontier or like part of this transition, and it's constantly like changing internally for me. Like sometimes I'm really frustrated with the fact that we're still in transition, because like I feel like even just my mother's generation, they got very far, but then you look at like the macro like historical timeline of things, and it's like, oh, it's only been a short time since women have actually had rights, so like, okay, I'm just part of this climbing, but it can be extra tiring because it is kind of like this silent extra job you have to do to just kind of exist in spaces that were closed to you not that long ago, even if it was like before I was born, like it was really, really segregated. And by the time I was born, it was more open. It's still a fight. And when I feel optimistic, I feel like every year changes. Cause like, for example, some PAs I've hired, they have good feedback. They're like, I've had a lot of women hire me. I've had people of color hire me. But when I was coming up, it was only like white dudes hiring me, and that's great that it's changed inside of a generation. But I at the same time, like there are a lot of challenges at work when you feel like you're getting conflict or pushback or bumping, and it's like not really based on facts. So you like, my mind goes to like, well, what is it about me that is not being trusted? And that's just another thing to take to therapy, I guess. It's like there's a lot of self-doubt. There's a lot of self-doubt on like, am I doing it the right way? And it's hard sometimes, like, because there's no one like you or who has looked like you or has your perspective that has done what you're doing or reaching for what you're reaching for. So in that is a lot of like scary, like, I don't know if this is correct, but I'm just going to go for it. And that tends to be the right thing. You just have to like go with your decision, and relax. It's just TV. It's just film. Like I'm not saving lives and stuff like that. And that like I'm valid and I can take up space and I can push back, when I don't agree on either a process on how to do the job or the point of view we're trying to tell in the story is getting weird or something like that. But yeah,
and don't you think that's why women are a part of the process? It's like,
yeah,
I've never remembered a time where I actually enjoyed the scripts that I'm reading more because women are being written better.
I agree. I agree. Just to go back to what Monica said real quick, I think what's exciting about this time in the industry is also the leadership. For me, it's very common for me to be the only female department head in a meeting. And it has been so apparent virtually, where we go, the Brady Bunch squares, and then I'm like, oh, there's like me and one other woman, type of thing. And it's just, that's the fight we need to keep having. And it's about mentorship and leadership. And at least for me, I hope that, people coming up, they're going to have different opportunities that we didn't have. For me, I have no problem standing up for myself, because if I agree to something, it's telling Hollywood that's okay to treat us that way. The pay inequality for people that like us, I can just talk from music supervisors, we are severely underpaid. And so the pay inequality is also there. So for me, when it's like becoming that leadership, being a department head, it's not just about me. When I say yes to something, the repercussions are huge. It's for my community. It's also for the people coming up, women, people of color, all those different things. So we have this extra responsibility that we also, when we say something in meetings, it's not just from our point of view, it's a much bigger issue. And by us constantly saying that, it is training old Hollywood to start to see the error of their ways. So I think that's what's exciting about being a woman and being a department head as a female, because maybe I just put a lot of pressure on myself when I say no to a project because you're going to pay me less than minimum wage. And they're like, well, we'll just find someone else. And I'm like, yeah, but that's just creating more to the problem. So I think also being a woman in the industry, it's a great time, but it's also a very stressful time.
I mean, this is beautiful. I appreciate the way that all of you frame this, you know, because there's a combination of like, ooh, there's opportunity ahead. Okay, yes, the climb has been long, you know, like we've been in the fight for a while. Okay, we're mindful of the history that we step into as we look toward the future. And so I kind of wanted to ask this as the, you know, the next step, because you're still an individual within this system, right? Mm-hmm. So what was kind of a breakthrough moment that you had in your own personal career, your personal journey, that you feel is really informing where you are right now?
You know, I never thought that I would say this in response to that question, but like absolutely, like the pandemic was a breakthrough moment in my personal career. I had been really like caught in a hamster wheel working on like big shows that I felt lucky to be in the room for, serving another person's vision. And it wasn't really until we had that space that I realized that I had not really created anything that was mine. And that like, you know, the big boys at the table are not always going to make room for us. And I, you know, had in my mind coming up in the industry, like there is this ladder and I will just work my butt off and climb this ladder. And I think finding that like it sounds very, very cheesy to, you know, build your own ladder, build your own table, all of that. But, you know, I had been doing that climbing and like caught in the hamster wheel of working on all the big dream projects in a way where like, you know, you're serving somebody else's vision. And I, you know, finally started learning to build my own ladder. I started an orchestra of all women and majority women of color and just like got funding for it and launched it during the pandemic. And that's like become a huge part of my life and a huge part of the work that I do is like bringing this orchestra along. And when I work on projects now and the conversation around diversity in the orchestra we hire comes up, I get to say, actually, here's one. Here's like, you know, the answer to this. And I think that that's something that the breakthrough moment for me was realizing that like the current systems, the current ladders that are in place are not set up for women and for people of color to succeed. And that like sometimes you have to rip your gaze away from that vision to see something else. I do not think that I would have been able to do that without the pandemic, despite the many obviously negative things that came with this time, but it was really eye-opening for me.
I know that for me, when I think about, you know, any watershed moments, any big turning points, I've been in production for literally decades. And I was a production assistant. I kind of worked my way through. I was the only woman, the only girl on the set. And oftentimes the vibe was like, you are here by my permission, by my good grace, you're allowed to be among us. And that was sort of the vibe on set from some of the guys. And it was a really different kind of climate. And somewhere along the line, I sort of turned around and noticed that the set had a bunch more women on it. And somewhere, like this is in recent times, in the last 5 or so years, where it was predominantly male. There were always a couple of camera women, but they were always the second assistant camera. They never would make it quite to focus puller or operator, or certainly not DP. And they were always women, but they always sort of wash out at about the second assistant camera level. There was always hair, makeup, wardrobe, and script supervisor. But other than that, really no women, no representation, none of that. And it was only in the last few years, it wasn't so much of a watershed as much as for me as a director, being the only female on the roster for most of the shows that I did. I was always the only girl, the only woman in the whole series for the season. And then, it started to change, and it was as a lot of momentum happening, and just in the industry at large. And then I do remember one day literally turning around and noticing my special effects team had 3 women, and I was, oh, that's awesome. And then noticing that there were a lot more women, and also noticing, more to the point, is that especially in television, it is a massively collaborative job. It is the idea of this auteur is not true. And it is about, and I think women are very good at this in general, is collaborating in a way that is safe, and and allowing people to try and expecting and raising a bar and saying, I expect you to reach this, and let's all bring our best game. And noticing on the film sets that there were a lot more diversity of people, and the whole film set's ability, everything has just elevated.
Mairzee, I would actually like you to keep going, because I want to jump into everyone's individual work, like in what you've actually been doing with this creative time to switch up the system. And we know that, with you, Shadow and Bone, you actually gave the characters these very intimate moments on screen that were definitely not the male gaze. You had the female gaze in mind, and you spoke to that a little bit earlier. So can you tell us, what was the directional approach, the directorial approach that you took to this storytelling with these scenes?
Historically, women have been used as a device or a plot device, or, in our storytelling, and they usually are very objectified. And in Shadow and Bone, that is absolutely not the case. Of course, our main character, Alina, has a lot of agency. And it was important for me as a director, and also with a young cast and young audience, to make sure that our character had agency as an individual, was making choice, and was also feeling the consequences of said choices. And that the notion of consent was very clear. And often a test is to say, never mind the Bechdel test, which is awesome, but if you were to take your female characters and your male characters and switch them, do they stand up? Is there anything about that rankles you? Would you say, oh, that man would never, no, that male character is too, he's always in reaction. He's not active. If you find that you would say that about the men, then you should say that about the women too.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I mean, and again, you're getting to the core of just the human story, to having a human heart, compassion, as you look through the lens at that character and treating that character with compassion. And okay, I feel like this is a great segue to Jeriana, what you have been doing, because you dive into something that is so well known. Halston is a big, very well established known brand, right? So what was your experience in that, creating and recreating these designs with something that is so steeped with so much history as Halston?
Right. Well, I think, my taking on of Halston was very terrifying. Earlier we were talking about our scariest things that we approach. This would probably be among one of the scariest things I've ever approached. Costumes is essentially a character in the show, and there was going to be a lot of focus on that. I knew that. So it was equally exciting. As much as things scare the bejesus out of you, it means there's a better reward at the end, I guess. And it was a lot of research, a lot of diving into this wonderful group of people that were immensely creative and fed off one another, and was, their own, little tribe of illustrators and models and jewelry makers and fashion designers and photographers. I mean, it's just a wonderful circle of creative people at the core of the story. So that was just so exciting for me, and getting a chance to illustrate that in the clothes was just kind of phenomenal. I have to say, we've been talking about our role as women and how you feel as a woman at the table and how that changes things. You know, my doing this project initially was just sort of like, felt like, wow, I'm a woman and I'm doing this, and you know, I'm a Latina and I'm doing this. Wow, number one. And number two, do it right and do it great and don't F it up, because that would really be a bad look for me and my people. But genuinely, you know, it's just, it was enormous. It was also it was a subject that everything kind of tied back to my department. It tied back to what I was going to be illustrating in terms of the collections, what Halston himself would be wearing, you know, because it was very visually driven story. So I really had to, you know, deliver an entire sort of visual arc for the show and collaborate, like, and it's those words, collaborate truly with our cast on how to execute the fashion that we were going to be putting together on screen, how to execute, you know, just everyone's relationship to the clothes, because that was also a big part of their characters. So I really bonded with this cast. I mean, it was no small undertaking, I'll say that.
Monica, you know, you were nominated for an Emmy last year for the, you know, what you did with Drunk History. And oh my goodness, you can be working with any period of time at any given moment. So we're thinking that's got to be a ton of research, right? That's got to be a ton of interpreting and reinterpreting history. So what is kind of your approach? Can you give us some insight into what it takes to create these environments for such completely different, vast time periods?
It's a lot of, it's really challenging for everybody, because just to give everyone an idea, a segment is about 14-page script. We can have up to 15 sets for that parameter of script pages, and then we shoot all of that in one day. And then it goes up and it goes down, the whole thing in one day. And we try to pick locations and stages where we can stay in at least 3 days, because that's like just the logistical part. So you're trying to shoehorn different eras, multiple sets, multiple stories into like one mega location. So if you're LA based, like, you know, we use a lot of Disney Ranch. We go to like historical mansions a lot. We need a lot of outdoor and indoor spaces. So there's no permanent sets, there's nothing to rest on. And the simplest way is usually the easiest way. Like, if we're doing this story, talk to the producers and like researchers, what their sources were. If it's podcasts, if it's articles, if it's an actual like reenactment documentary that was on History Channel 20 years ago, if it's Ken Adams, like, let's look at it and grab stills and like what is popping out visually. Sometimes there's nothing like that. Sometimes all the research is just text. So you're going through a lot of library, like just tons of libraries, a lot of Google, a lot of like, this feels like this era, even if it's like quite inaccurate to, you know, very to academics, it might not be right, but it serves at least the good background to tell this story, you know. And I just want to repeat some things I've said about it before, but it's like the production design sometimes was easy because I just had to like create a historical room, you know, and the jokes would be the script, it would be performance, it would be costume. Like, costume was either really high end or purposely Party City Halloween store. So, and sometimes I was in on it, like props, signage, the location itself could be part of the joke. It could be a painted backdrop from theater. You know, we stole a lot of ideas from community theater aesthetic was really like the seed of that show. Like, we are going to be the best finance community theater company out there, you know, like, and like a lot of like 2D just dorky gimmicks in order to get the story across, and like using literal toys we did. So it was really, really creative. I really miss it. It was really hard, and I don't miss that, you know. And there's so many other women on that crew I'm so thankful for, because like a lot of the stories that Drunk History is like really well known for, like a lot of its segments on historical women, it was because we had these historical researchers and later producers who were women, who were really digging into like niche women's history topics in order to get them on Comedy Central, and we could like learn
that.
And I've learned so much from them, from working on the show. And
so
like,
again, it was kind of like what Maurice was saying, or like it's the diversity behind the scenes that actually gets translated to what you see in front of the camera. So again, like our collective diversity, our natural collective diversity is always informing the stories and really making things shine. We're hearing the same things because this is a visual medium. So like every single thing, you know, like means something, but it's also an auditory medium as well. And like, it's one of those things that it's so easy to take it for granted when you're hearing the perfect music behind the scene. It just goes ahead and transports you. And you're working on the things like Deadly Illusions and Why Women Kill. And it can literally hinge upon that right music being behind what's happening in that storyline, right? So let me just kind of ask you, how do you know when you've got the one? Like, how do you select it? And how do you know when you're like, yes, that is the thing that needs to be going behind this, you know, scene where she's plotting on whatever.
So what's awesome about audio is it's, at least the way I work and a lot of my colleagues work, is with audio, we are creating a universe through sound, right? So if you think you're walking around outside and audio is not important, our entire world, audio is such a big thing. You know, when you watch something without sound, everyone always gets awkward about it because even in our normal world, we don't have true silence. There's always actually something. So I love creating this universe through sound. It's a really, really collaborative process. I talk immensely with my producers, my directors, the writer, if they're involved. We have this conversation when we talk about plot and characters, and I come up with people's backstories. Like, this person grew up listening to this artist because their dad introduced them to that. Like, I create these kind of playlists about backstories of characters to help me kind of understand what the producer, the writer, the director is envisioning. And sound is really interesting as well as music, because everyone's like, oh, I love this song, it's so great. But music elevates the story and the character. So when you put a song onto picture, it doesn't always work. So it's really about having to come up with that communication and that language with your collaborators, because they might say, I love this Katy Perry song or Beyonce song or whatever. And I'm like, that's great. Let's have a little bit more besides, you know, the specifics of money and all that stuff. But then you see it to picture and there's just something really missing. And for me, the way I like to work is everything is intentional. Even if it's a background use at a cafe, they're little Easter eggs that really help tell the story, the world, the universe. In Deadly Illusions, for example, even the shopping scene, that song that's in there was from an indie band in France. And the lyrics were actually a representation of what our main character, Mary, was thinking about Grace, right? So it's called Prettiest Virgin, and she believes this woman is a virgin and she's innocent and everything. But the song also is the flip side because it has a darker thing, which is the underneath of Grace we're going to find out later. I put a lot of Easter eggs in that on stuff like Why Women Kill, which Mark Cherry is great to work with. He is such a music nerd. He knows what he likes. All the music, especially for songs, they enhance the story or it's a callback to something else. So it's really a collaborative process. It's not just one person, because a director could have this amazing idea of like, I really want all this type of music. You listen, you come up with a conversation because, no joke, I want this music to be more red. I know what red means to them. We create this like crazy language, just like costumes or production design or, you know, your DP and everything. And it's just so funny. Someone be like, did he just tell you to make it more red? And I'm like, yeah. And I know exactly what he means, or just make it fun. And that's kind of the fun of it. And there's a lot of collaboration and exploration that goes, you know, for Why Women Kill, I really went deep dive into catalog, right? From the 20s, the 30s, the 40s. And I found some amazing B-sides. Someone's like, I've never heard this song before. We've never licensed this song. And I'm like, great. I think this song is interesting. The lyrics, the vibe, also what we're trying to say in this scene towards the characters. It's not, music's intentional. You know, there are people that just throw things in. They're like, oh, it's a cafe, just throw something. No, that's not what the art of audio is.
Macy, this brings me to you because Ratatouille, the TikTok musical, that's something that you cannot plan for, right? This was just one of these moments. We are all going through last year, trauma. And then something really enjoyable happens where, basically it starts with a TikTok creator saying a tribute to Remy from Disney Pixar's Ratatouille film. And then everybody sees it, lose their minds. People start creating songs, creating mock-up sets, singing songs and everything. And it's just like the next thing we know, eventually it's picked up by an actual virtual the musical, and ends up raising $2 million for the Actors Fund. $2 million during the pandemic for the Actors Fund. So Macy, can you tell us about the production process? Because we're thinking that this had to move in a quick, completely different kind of way than this would normally go about creating something. The musical development cycle is completely off for this. It was its own thing. So give us kind of a bird's eye seat into what that was like.
People all around the world were making these songs and sets and playbill designs, and the users of TikTok as a community, not knowing each other, started contributing to this musical, writing songs where there was a gap, or creating a costume design, or choreographing something with people during the pandemic. And I was actually visiting my family after Thanksgiving, and I was sitting on the couch with my mom, and because we had seen the movie, and I was showing her, I was like, look, there's this thing on this new app I just got, and all these people are doing this really cool thing where everyone's making stuff, and someone's putting it together, and it's this social media written, I didn't know how to describe it. And we watched some of the videos together, and I showed it to her, and we had this moment. And a couple hours later, the same evening, I got a call from a Broadway producer who was like, hey, I don't know if you're aware of this Ratatouille TikTok musical thing, but we're producing it. Do you want to do it? I was really, really grateful that I had just done this deep dive into it and was able to be yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. And sure thing. But getting that call was about 2.5 weeks before we would need to go into the studio to record a full orchestra, and about 4 weeks before the final cut would air to hundreds of thousands of people. It had not been written when I got that call. Nothing had been organized. These producers were just we want to do this. It's going to happen unbelievably rapidly. And we called around, and we are going to assemble a team who we believe can do this rapidly. That was strange for me to hear, because I have never worked that rapidly before, and was very, very nervous about when I orchestrate something, I tend to be overly perfectionist about it. I have a really tough time letting it go and releasing it and deciding to stop making edits. And I was how on earth am I physically going to do this, especially with a large orchestra? And I keep saying I feel I kind of blacked out for 13 days. There were 13 songs. I did a song a day. Woke up in the morning and was well, I'm going to score this song for 20-piece orchestra today. I physically cannot go to sleep until it's finished. That's just what the job is. And we had this assembly line, this music team. I hurt my heroic music team, where a song was being transcribed by a music assistant and then being sent to Daniel Mertzleft, who was our music supervisor and arranger, and he would kind of put together a piano sketch of it for me, and he would funnel it to me, and I would blow it out into full orchestra, and then I would send it to a copyist, who would send it to the drummer, who would send it to the bassist. We had rhythm record at home, and then we did this marathon studio day where we got the orchestra COVID tested, all of those things, and got in the studio and recorded it. I was a really special part of that process was getting to hire the orchestra that I founded, the Broadway Sinfonietta, which was, we had an all-women orchestra, and about 80% women of color orchestra play that score. So it was kind of a intersection of all of the things that I love. But the style of the music really felt like home to me. I was absolutely raised on Disney scores, and on the classic Disney sound, and on Broadway, especially as an emerging orchestrator, it's pretty, even not as an emerging orchestrator, it's pretty rare for a producer to call you and be here is a 20-piece orchestra, make this sound like a classic Disney movie, run free. There's not really budgetary restrictions. So to get to do that was I guess I would say this was both the hardest and the easiest job I've ever done, because the time constraint was absolutely outrageous, but it was the first time I got to work in this big style that felt like home to me. And in that sense, it kind of wrote itself. And one of the most fascinating things about this particular project for me is I'm used to doing all this work, and the max people who see it per night is a couple thousand, right? A Broadway theater, if it is sold out, is 2,000 people. And airing this to hundreds of thousands of people, I was just I've been still contemplating what the pandemic has done for theater makers who are now making things for the screen, that it's oh my God, when you guys make things, everyone sees it. And I'm so used to like only the people I can physically see seeing the thing. And that's been something that's been, I'm still kind of wrapping my head around the transitional phase for the way the pandemic has jolted so many Broadway artists into creating work for screen. And it still haven't really contemplated that. I'm so used to not that many people watching anything.
I mean, I love this. It changes the way that, we think about intimacy through the screen, right? It changes the way that we think about intimate storytelling. And so, okay, think about your younger self. Like if you could go back, you could mentor the younger version of you. What is one thing that you would like to tell younger you about the industry and your career? Like something that you wish you had known at the time when you were starting to venture into this and think that this was something you want to do?
You don't need to know everything before you do it. We as women tend to stand back in the threshold, look out and say, I have to be an absolute expert before I try. And we should allow that we are enough, firstly, and that to say you take the risks. You don't have to be an expert before you try.
I think being really bold and unapologetic about what you want, being unafraid to ask for things. I think that every game-changing opportunity that I've had in my life, I have had to directly ask for. Send an email to somebody and say, can I meet with you and show you how qualified I am for this? And I don't really know where that instinct came from, but I do know that it kind of took me a while to grow into it. I probably could have started a few years earlier if I had been less afraid to just ask for what you want, ask for what you know you'll be good at, and just, be bold in knowing what you want.
And have confidence in yourself, because if you're not confident with who you are as an artist and a person, no one's going to be confident to give you that chance. So that's also something really important to think about.
Yeah. I think, I was growing up and got scared a little bit or put off by things that were maybe too feminine or I don't know. I was always thinking about my friends and how basically in the end, my best work and success has come from working with, hanging out with other women and giving each other the space and confidence to be as weird, ambitious, even kind of mean in a safe space without it coming back to ruin a reputation or something. I think being raised female, you're so reputation oriented, and that's why we wait a long time, because being confident going out there is a risk. And I wish I could just talk to myself when she was younger and be like, you don't have to hang out with just guys just to feel confident. That was it was fine. I'm really happy to have all my guy friends, but there's definitely this immature perspective that only cool guys and cool girls were doing stuff. And it's no, man, you could be whoever you want and be creative, And I think I was tempering original or things I was into at that younger age and only rediscovering them now, and being more comfortable being really feminine now. And I feel a little bit robbed, I robbed myself. So yeah, the message is basically echoing everyone else. Be you, be true, trust other ladies, don't be so shy. If you really like something, you will figure it out, you will do well, and if you don't, it's a great learning experience. The mistake isn't fatal.
I would love to go around, because now that everybody has been, hearing you share your journeys and your insights and what you've been through and the stuff you worked on and what you learned and where you are now, they're going to want to know what's next. So we go around and just get some ideas of what you got cooking without giving any spoilers.
I actually found a new skill about 3 years ago, and I'm very blessed that someone hired me, Viacom hired me as a music supervisor, and it turns I just stepped up to the plate because there was no producer for their content, and I attract the network on a higher level, and they said, who was the producer? And they're like, oh, we really like her. So sometimes I get hired as a music supervisor, sometimes I'm a producer, but I've been really getting into my producer creative chops. Scripty, which is a podcast company I am a part of, we are actually our all-female creative team, which is amazing. And we optioned a book called Free to Fall, and we partnered with Genius Entertainment, Marseille Martin's company. So we recorded that in 3 days, talk about some craziness. And we're really excited about that. We're in post for that. And also I am producing a new young adult series that also, as we talked about consent, this also addresses that. That we have like James Marsters, I'm allowed to name drop, James Marsters and Paul Johansson that are extremely interested. And I'm a creative producer on that. So really working more into my producer chops as well. So a lot of my skill set kind of transferred over, and I didn't realize that. That's another thing in Hollywood, every women out there, skill sets, they build on each other, and there's different pivots and everything. So I've been getting more into producing, and I'm really, really excited about the tail end of development. The show's called The Fallen, the YA show, and I'm really excited about everything that's going to come with that as well. So hopefully I'll be able to hire all you ladies on it. That would be amazing.
Monica, what about you?
It's actually my second biggest, or I don't know. I've designed little things, so this is a big show for me, and I'm really thankful it's happening. But I'm just putting it together for Netflix. I'm not mentioning names yet because it's in negotiations, but I'm really looking forward to it, and it does reunite me with some friends from Drunk History. So that's really nice, and I'm really excited about. It's also a very diverse cast and crew, so. Again, like really stoked on that opportunity. But yeah, I just came off art directing a really hard show. So I'm also trying to just enjoy this early summer. Like I picked up gardening during the pandemic. I'm like so ready to buy more plants and take care of them. And yeah, just enjoy being home with my husband and our family and our cats,
That's beautiful. Mairzee, what about you?
I have to plead the fifth.
We said no spoilers. So there's
I just come off several shows, and yeah, I've got to plead the fifth.
Okay, right. We know how to move along.
Yeah,
we know how to move along. We'll catch it on deadline and things like that. You just tell us when to look for that. And
yeah,
Macy, what about you?
I should say, Mairzee, that's like the sexiest answer. That's the best
answer. Mic drop. Mic drop.
I should say I plead the fifth. With the orchestra that I founded, the Sinfonietta, we are also getting ready to record our debut album with a major record label. I'm not allowed to say which label yet, but I'm very excited about it. And I am kind of in the earlier research contracting stages of gearing up to launch a Hollywood Sinfonietta, which will have LA-based players. Because as opportunities have come in from New York, I get asked all the time, can you put together an orchestra to do this recording in LA? And I absolutely know those players exist, and I am in the process of gathering and uniting them. So I'll be out in California next month working on that, and I'm excited about it.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you all again for being here, for sharing space, sharing wisdom, sharing journey, sharing pain points, sharing joy points. Like this feels just like a really beautiful wind of optimism, and we're seeing the future through what you all are doing right now in the present. I just thank you. Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Jeriana. Thank you, Macy. Thank you, Mairzee. Thank you, Monica, for sharing space and sharing time. And thank you to all of you for watching. This Impact24 PR and Comic-Con. Thank you for putting on this amazing panel and bringing all of us together. And this has just been absolutely fabulous. I love spending time like this. So again, this has been Impact24 PR's second annual Hollywood Game Changers panel. And we will see you all next time.